It's 7 p.m. Monday, August 5th. Here is Seoul.
Coming up on NEWSCENTER tonight. Seoul's tech-heavy KOSDAQ plunges to below 600 for the first time in 3 years, triggering a sidecar trading suspension. Korea's main index and the country's currency also tumbled to a 3-year low on worsening Korea, Japan, and China-U.S. trade rows.
President Moon Jae-in once again touts his so-called peace economy as a way to overcome Japan's retaliatory trade measures. He claims economic cooperation between the two Koreas will help the South overtake Japan's economy.
South Korea considers termination of its military information sharing agreement with Tokyo, or GSOMIA, as tensions between the two countries continue to escalate.
Korea logs its hottest day of the year so far, with the mercury reaching up to 37 degrees Celsius in parts of Seoul. The southern regions, however, braces for heavy precipitation and strong winds brought by Typhoon Francisco starting Tuesday. NEWSCENTER begins now.
Good evening and welcome to Arirang NEWSCENTER. Live from Seoul, I'm Han Daeun.
And I'm Noah. It's great to have you with us this evening. We begin with Korea's stock market. Seoul's benchmark Kospi and tech-heavy KOSDAQ plunged to a 3-year low today as trade tensions between Korea and Japan intensify.
The secondary bourse also had to halt trading during the day as the index fell below 600. Our Seon Kyung starts us off.
South Korea's benchmark Kospi closed Monday at just under 1947, losing 2.56%. During trading, it fell below 1946, the lowest figure in 2 years and 9 months. The Kospi had fallen below 2,000-point mark last Friday for the first time in 7 months. The KOSDAQ, Korea's secondary market, plunged almost 7.5% to 569.79, the lowest level since January of 2015. Once it had fallen more than 5%, the Korean exchange triggered a cool-off period known as a sidecar, during which all program trading is halted for 5 minutes. But the sell-off continued.
The worsening global trade environment has affected the Korean stock market to some degree. However, if you compare the Kospi and the KOSDAQ was down more. After all, market concerns about companies' future performances, especially biotechnology companies such as Shilajit, were reflected in this big drop on the KOSDAQ.
It wasn't just Korean stocks that suffered. Major indexes in Asia were also down significantly. China's benchmark Shanghai Composite fell more than 1.6% to around 2822, while Japan's Nikkei and Hong Kong Hang Seng Index were down 1.75% and a little over 2.8% respectively. The expert points out all the external factors that have investors worried about slower growth, including a Fed rate cut that was less aggressive than some hoped for, President Trump's announcement of a new 10% tariff on $300 billion worth of Chinese imports starting September 1st, and Japan's removing South Korea from its whitelist of trading partners. Seon Kyung, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in says one way to overcome what he calls Japan's selfish retaliatory trade restrictions is by carrying through the Korean peace process and by outdoing the Japanese economy with prosperous inter-Korean projects. It's the second time he's issued such a statement in 3 days. Our Shin Se-min at the Blue House.
President Moon Jae-in's confident message on Japan's unjust economic retaliatory measures is that South Korea will turn the measures into an opportunity to push the economy forward.
일본은 결코 우리 경제의 도약을 막을 수 없습니다. 오히려 경제 강국으로 가기 위한 우리의 의지를 더 키워주는 자극제가 될 것입니다.
Speaking during a weekly meeting with his top aides, the president said he was able to realize once again the importance of promoting economic growth based on inter-Korean peace.
이번 일을 겪으며 우리는 평화 경제의 절실함을 다시 한번 확인할 수 있었습니다. 남북 간의 경제 협력으로 평화 경제가 실현된다면 우리는 단숨에 일본의 우위를 따라잡을 수 있습니다.
The so-called peace economy, part of President Moon's envisioned plan of peace and economic development reinforcing one another, aims to provide a new growth engine for the regional economy. And the president said his country shouldn't be easily swayed on the peace economy, nor give up pushing for it because of the fluctuating relationship between North Korea and the U.S. He said as a responsible member of the international community, his country will continue to uphold the universal value of humanity and international norms, take the lead in establishing peace on the Korean Peninsula, and stand strong on the international stage. Perhaps confirming that the trade dispute between South Korea and Japan will be a long-lasting issue, the president urged his administration to ensure the government's stated policy objectives are fully reflected when devising next year's budget plan. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Seoul's finance minister has laid out a step-by-step plan to counter Japan's export curbs that focuses on boosting Korea's competitiveness. Details include securing supplies of key items needed by local industry, finding new sources that can replace Japanese imports, and financial support to those companies. Our Hong Yu tells us more.
South Korea's finance minister Hong Nam-gi announced on Monday measures aimed at eliminating South Korea's external dependent industrial structure as part of its efforts to cope with Japan's recently imposed export curbs. Under the plan, South Korea plans to strengthen its supply of materials, components, and equipment to revive the nation's flagging manufacturing industry. To do so, 100 strategic core items will be selected as items to be secured over the next 5 years based on their demand within South Korea. South Korea will push to diversify import negotiations with various countries and try to expand local production by solving pending issues that prevent local companies from producing items that are badly needed. In addition, the government will focus on establishing a healthy cooperation model between supply and demand chains among local companies. Such measures will be backed by support from the government, which promised to muster all necessary assets and capabilities, like extra funding, tax relief, and deregulation measures to ease the burden on South Korean firms. Hong also said the South Korean government will work hard to minimize corporate damage and uncertainty.
We will try our best to stabilize the short-term supply of materials, components, and equipment by securing alternate import partners. Along with this, we will proceed with the measures discussed today, as it's our task to innovatively reduce the external dependency of our industry through strong competitiveness in supplies.
Minister Hong wrapped up the meeting by emphasizing that Japan's removal of South Korea from its trade whitelist was an unfair economic sanction, and he again urged Tokyo to retract the move. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
With Japan piling retaliatory trade restrictions on South Korea, both countries are preparing to hold their annual trilateral summit with their other neighbor, China. A senior Blue House official said Monday the date is being arranged. The South China Morning Post, citing Kyodo News Agency, had reported the day before that the summit is likely to be held in the Chinese capital in December. Seoul and Tokyo are working to hold the meeting despite their trade tensions, and the question is whether they'll be able to find a breakthrough to resolve their dispute. South Korea's defense chief says the government is mulling termination of its military information sharing agreement with Japan as tensions worsen between the two sides over Tokyo's continuing export curbs against Seoul. Our Oh Jung-hee reports.
South Korea is carefully considering whether to terminate its information sharing agreement with Japan. That's according to South Korea's defense chief at a parliamentary meeting on Monday. Chung Kyung-do said the government originally wanted to extend the information sharing agreement with Japan by another year, but is now carefully considering scrapping that as Japan recently linked its export curbs to security issues.
We are prudently reviewing the matter, considering various terms comprehensively, as there are factors which the public could be insecure about. Nothing has been decided yet.
With South Korea and Japan both being U.S. allies, their militaries have been sharing information under a 3-year deal, which needs to be renewed later this month. That deal, known as the General Security of Military Information Agreement, or GSOMIA, was signed in 2016. According to Seoul's defense ministry, Japan has provided Seoul with data gathered by Japan satellites regarding North Korea's nuclear weapons and missiles. And South Korea has been sharing levels 2 and 3 of its 3 levels of classified military information with Japan. If Seoul looks likely to terminate the deal, this could prompt Washington to step in as a mediator in the trade dispute. Washington sees the information sharing agreement as a key element of the 3-country security cooperation, particularly in achieving the final fully verified denuclearization of North Korea, as well as countering China's influence in Northeast Asia. The deadline for South Korea to notify Japan whether it's terminating GSOMIA is August 24th. Otherwise, it'll be automatically extended for another year. 오정희, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, in Parliament, National Assembly Speaker Moon Hee-sang has sent a resolution condemning Tokyo's trade retaliation to the Japanese government and Parliament. South Korea's rival parties unanimously passed the resolution last week. It calls on Japan to immediately lift its export curbs on 3 high-tech materials, as well as withdraw its decision to strip Seoul of preferential treatment in export procedures. It says Tokyo's actions go against the principles of free trade and undermine bilateral relations. The Blue House is arranging a meeting with the country's 5 main conglomerates to draw up measures to deal with Japan's trade restrictions. Kim Sang-jo, President Moon's Chief of Staff of Policy, told reporters today that he's planning to hold talks with the vice presidents of Samsung Electronics, Hyundai Motor, SK, LG and Lotte, although the date has not yet been fixed. Reports have indicated, though, that they're likely to sit down on Thursday. Kim added that he has already met with all 5 VPs individually and as a group, and that they continue to speak on the phone about Japan's trade curbs. Japan's decision to remove South Korea from its whitelist will not result in direct embargoes or a drastic cut in exports, but it will raise uncertainties for Korean companies. This is according to a Goldman Sachs report on the potential effects of the bilateral trade dispute. It was introduced to reporters by the Blue House earlier today. The report says because South Korea and Japan are mutually dependent on trade, the whitelist measure is unlikely to have a great impact on their trade activities. But it explains Korea could face some supply disruption, while Korean firms will have to better manage their inventory in the long run. And these uncertainties combined could hurt private investment in Korea in the coming years, negatively affecting Korean business sentiment. South Korea has expressed regret over the suspended display of a statue that represents the victims of Japan's wartime sexual slavery at its biggest international art festival. Stressing that the freedom of expression must be guaranteed, the Culture Ministry called for normalization. Kan Young-woo reports.
The South Korean government expressed deep regret Monday over Japan's decision to remove from its biggest international art festival a statue of a girl representing the victims of Japan's World War II-era sexual slavery.
The freedom of cultural and artistic creation and expression must be respected under all circumstances, and we hope the removal of this work will be corrected quickly.
The spokesperson said the Culture Ministry plans to convey its position to the art festival's organizers. The Comfort Women's statue had been on display at the Aichi Triennale in central Japan since last Thursday, before being taken away on Saturday. The festival organizers said the decision to suspend the display of the statue was based on terror threats by telephone and email, but claimed it had nothing to do with earlier comments by Japanese officials in which the mayor of Nagoya, Takashi Kawamura, publicly asked for the display to be taken down, while Japan's chief cabinet secretary Yoshihide Suga hinted at cutting the government's financial support for art festivals. Asked on Monday if his comments led to the removal of the statue, Suga said there was no pressure from the government. Meanwhile, Japanese newspapers criticized the statue's removal. The Asahi Shimbun said the officials' comments effectively violated freedom of expression and creation, adding that terror threats are not acceptable. The Tokyo Shimbun also reported on a statement from the Japan Pen Club, a group of famous Japanese artists calling for the statue's continued display. 강영우, Arirang News.
A group of Japanese protesters took to the streets of Tokyo over the weekend, urging their Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to stop the export curbs on South Korea. Roughly 200 demonstrators gathered near Shinjuku Station and called the export restrictions, quote, foolish because they only bring economic instability to both countries. They also said they fully support the anti-Abe protests held by Koreans in Seoul. Organisers of Sunday's protest said their future demonstrations depend on how Abe responds to the worsening relations between Seoul and Tokyo. The Parliamentary Defence Committee has adopted a resolution calling on North Korea to halt its military provocations. Also, during a Q&A session, the rival lawmakers questioned what it was the regime fired last week, following contrasting announcements by Seoul and Pyongyang, as well as the government's response measures. Kim Min-ji with more.
The National Assembly's Defense Committee has adopted a resolution condemning North Korea's recent military provocations. It calls for an immediate halt to them, saying they're a threat to peace and stability on the Korean peninsula. The resolution adds that the North should faithfully abide by a joint military agreement between the two Koreas aimed at reducing tensions, and that it will be held responsible for any violations.
We call on the government to devise measures to deter North Korea's nuclear and missile capabilities through the military and the Seoul-Washington alliance.
The North recently launched multiple projectiles into the East Sea 3 separate times in the course of just over a week. Defense Committee lawmakers on Monday were briefed on related developments, with Seoul's defense minister saying that a joint analysis was underway with the U.S. and that it was stepping up its surveillance assets. There has been controversy over what Pyongyang actually fired, though it claimed it tested a rocket system.
We've been analyzing the weapons it launched. Based on that and the data we already have, we announced that it could be a short-range ballistic missile. But after Pyongyang claimed it had test-fired a rocket system, the intelligence authorities in Seoul and Washington have been conducting further analysis. Our initial assessment was based on joint analysis as well.
In light of these provocations, some lawmakers asked whether Seoul has any plans to deploy tactical nuclear weapons, something the defense chief said is not being considered. The opposition slammed South Korea's lukewarm response to the launches, which they claimed were a violation of the inter-Korean military agreement. The minister said that the military has expressed concerns over the matter.
We have expressed concerns that the North's actions are not in line with the joint military agreement and that we will make sure they abide by the deal to foster peace. We maintain military readiness and continue to devise measures to counter any new weapons development.
As for the recent violations of South Korea's air defense identification zone by China and Russia, the defense chief said that air intrusions will likely continue. He said Seoul's military will act sternly according to its manuals, but in a way that it will not be mistaken for hostility or provoke a military confrontation. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Newly appointed U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper is due to arrive in Seoul on Friday for talks with his South Korean counterpart. They are set to discuss a range of issues, including North Korea's denuclearization, defense cost sharing, and the possibility of dispatching South Korean troops to the Strait of Hormuz. Kim Yo-sun reports.
U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper will visit South Korea this week to sit down with his counterpart to discuss security-related issues. This will be his first visit to Seoul since taking office late last month. His meeting with Seoul's defense chief Chung Kyung-do on Friday is set to receive the spotlight at home and abroad as it comes amid North Korea's continued military provocations. South Korea's defense ministry says the visit will be a chance to reaffirm the broad principles of the alliance. It added they will discuss a range of issues, including the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula and the transfer of wartime operational control from the U.S. to South Korea. The talks may also cover the issue of cost sharing between Seoul and Washington to cover the expenses of stationing U.S. troops in the country. Chung and Esper could also discuss Washington's possible dispatch of intermediate-range missiles in Asia. The Pentagon chief told reporters in Sydney on Saturday that he hopes to see it happen.
But let's be clear, I'm talking about conventional weapons. INF range, right? Exactly. And I would prefer months. I just don't have I don't have the latest state of play on timelines for either a cruise missile or long-range missile as the Army was preparing it. But these things tend to take longer than you expect.
The issue of South Korea's military intelligence sharing pact with Japan could also be an agenda item, as Seoul announced last Friday that as part of its countermeasures against Tokyo's trade curbs on Seoul, it could review whether to renew the General Security of Military Information Agreement, seen as an essential part of trilateral security cooperation with the U.S. It's also left to be seen whether Esper will make a formal request to dispatch South Korean troops to the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, currently in Australia with Esper, has said he hopes to see Seoul and Tokyo participate in protecting the world's primary oil shipping channel from threats posed by Iran. Kim Yo-san, Arirang News.
North Korea is reportedly extorting billions of US dollars from companies and institutions in other countries through cyber attacks. The Tokyo-based Asahi Shimbun, citing the UN Security Council's expert panel, reported today that over the past 4 years, the North has conducted 35 cyber attacks against financial institutions and cryptocurrency exchanges in at least 17 countries, including India, Chile and Nigeria. The regime was able to extort $2 billion from them to use in its weapons programs. According to the report, there have been 15 cyber attacks against virtual currency exchanges since 2017, and 10 of them were against exchanges in South Korea.
Thousands of people, including teachers, aviation workers, finance employees, and civil servants, have reportedly taken to the streets in a general strike, delaying or canceling flights in one of Asia's busiest airports and paralyzing the subway system in the city. Our Kim Ji-yeon has the latest.
Thousands of people have taken to the streets in Hong Kong in a massive strike that includes teachers, civil servants, and finance employees. BBC reported that more than 200 flights were canceled and several mass transit railway lines have been suspended due to the citywide strike. Through its website, the Hong Kong Airport Authority said in a statement that it advised passengers to check with their airlines for the latest flight information and to proceed to the airport only when their seats and flight time have been confirmed. Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam held a rare news conference saying the demonstrations are pushing it to a verge of very dangerous situation.
But we continue to allow these violent protesters to make use of the Fugitive Offenders Bill and these demands to conceal their ulterior motives. That is going to push Hong Kong to the verge of a very dangerous situation.
Protests have continued for 9 consecutive weeks now. What started as opposition against a controversial extradition bill, now suspended, has evolved to include protection of rights and police accountability. Violent clashes have broken out between protesters and police officers. More than 60 people have been arrested on charges that include rioting, a crime that could mean up to 10 years in prison. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
The government has set next year's minimum wage at $8,591, or about $7.16 per hour. The Labor Ministry's decision, announced earlier today, will apply across all workplaces from January 1st next year. The wage hike is in line with the Minimum Wage Commission's decision last month to raise the hourly pay rate by 2.9%, the smallest gain since 2010. President Moon Jae-in had pledged to raise hourly pay to 10,001 an hour by 2020, but there's been a strong backlash from businesses amid the country's economic slowdown and sluggish employment figures. Police have placed a travel ban on an unnamed official who is being investigated over the recent controversy surrounding footballer Cristiano Ronaldo's absence from an exhibition match. In a press briefing earlier today, Seoul police didn't say which organization the official was affiliated with. They also told reporters that 2 other officials from Korea's top football league governing body have also been questioned over the matter. Local football fans were enraged last month when Ronaldo stayed on the bench for the match against the K-League All-Stars in Seoul, citing muscle fatigue. The K-League said the Juventus forward was contractually obligated to play at least 45 minutes and requested an apology from the Italian club. A South Korean attorney last week filed fraud charges against Juventus and the Korean marketing firm that organized the match. Today was the hottest day of the season so far in Korea. Heat wave warnings were issued for the entire country, and the government is coming up with measures to keep people safe from the scorching heat. Our Lee Min-sun reports.
South Korea continues to boil under a heat wave on Monday. The mercury went as high as 37 degrees Celsius in some parts of Seoul and over 40 degrees in Anseong, Gyeonggi-do province, making it the hottest day of the season so far. Heat wave warnings were in place for the most parts of the country, and the temperatures during the daytime will also rise above 35 degrees Celsius on Tuesday. People are advised to stay indoors during the peak heat of the day and drink enough water to avoid heat-related diseases. As of Friday last week, some 800 people, mostly elderly people, suffered from heat-related illnesses. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism released a disaster manual for sporting events on Monday. The manual provides guidelines for canceling or postponing sporting events in the event of earthquakes, typhoons, heat waves, or high levels of fine dust. The manual is non-mandatory and advises organizers to issue a warning if the temperature goes over 33 degrees Celsius for more than 2 straight days and consider rescheduling sporting events held outdoors or come up with countermeasures for heat waves. Typhoon Francisco, the 8th typhoon of the season, will make landfall over southern parts of South Korea on Tuesday night. The weather report forecasts that after drenching the coastal region with heavy rain, it will pass through the country's inland regions and exit the peninsula toward the East Sea on Wednesday evening. Heat wave warnings could be lifted in the areas affected by the Typhoon Francisco, as the heavy rain is expected to lower temperatures. Lee Min-sun, Arirang News.
An ice cold beer may sound perfect on a hot summer day like today, but experts warn that alcohol can cause dehydration more easily in the heat. They say alcohol causes you to urinate more often and you lose more water through sweat. In the heat, you can lose twice as much fluids than normal. The hot weather also increases the effects of alcohol and can aggravate cardiovascular problems in people with high blood pressure. If you have to, drinking plenty of water before, during and after consuming alcohol is advised, especially during the summer. South Korea's foreign exchange reserves edged up in July compared to the month before. According to the Bank of Korea, they reached $403 billion at the end of last month, up $40 million from June. The central bank attributed the rise to an increase in revenue from foreign currency assets despite a stronger greenback. As of the end of June, South Korea had the world's 9th largest foreign exchange reserves, with China topping the list. South Korean tennis player Chung Hyun has won the 2019 International Challenger Chengdu in China. He beat Japan's Yuichi Sugita by 2-0 in the final of the singles competition on Sunday. His 9th Challenger Tour title comes following a 5-month absence due to back injury. Chung currently ranks 166th in the world, and with the extra points from the title win, he's expected to rise to around 140th. He will play another challenger event in Japan next Monday. The Seoul Metropolitan Government plans to build a new skywalk above the Hanggang-daegyo Bridge by June 2021. Availing the design, the city government expressed hope that the skywalk could be more than just a pathway across the Han River. It's expected to have benches to sit on, sun lounges, a viewing terrace, as well as performance and exhibition stages. Flowers and trees planted along it will also create a so-called green wall to filter out fine dust and keep pedestrians cool. That has been your 3-minute news flash. It is that time where we take a look at some of Arirang's digital media content.
And today we have another episode of Koreator, where foreigners share their love for Korea.
Noodle party, noodle party, 비빔국수, 비빔국수.
Should we start?
Yeah.
All right. Hello everyone, we are Koreator Nelly.
And 장준.
We're going to make bibimbap noodles. This is noodles. We also have
some sugar.
sugar, it's Korean gochujang. It's red pepper paste. And also some sesame oil, sesame seeds. And it's some boiled eggs for each person.
The last thing is our secret.
Right, we have a secret recipe. This one, soda.
We're gonna make seasoning first. Let's go.
Let's go.
I'm serving. Now we will make gochujang based seasoning. 1, 2, 3. So this one.
Wow, sweet. Aren't we missing something?
Yeah, we missed something. This is leftover soda. Just pour a little and taste a little and pour again.
So we'll start with boiling the noodles. Put them in the boiling water like this. Now you'll try to get rid of the water.
I'm starving.
Me too. Eggs. Put it like this.
And last decoration is sesame seed.
Ooh.
Last one. It's really good, right?
There you have it, everyone. This is the perfect recipe. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and we really want to see you guys trying this yourself at home. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
The country continues to bake with temperatures surpassing the 35-degree mark. And to add to the extreme conditions, Typhoon Francisco is expected to affect the country starting tomorrow.
Let's get more on this hot weather from our Michelle Park at the Weather Center. Michelle.
Typhoon Francisco is forecast to land on the country's southern coast and then track its course up across Chungcheong provinces and exit the peninsula through Gangwon province and towards the East Sea by Wednesday evening. The 8th typhoon of the season is expected to impact the country directly with strong winds, and the southeast coastal regions and some of the eastern parts of Gangwon province will be hit with 200 millimeters of precipitation, and the capital and the west coast of the country can expect between 5 and 60 millimeters of rain. And a typhoon is expected to bring more hot air into the peninsula tomorrow, especially in the northern regions of the country, effectively intensifying the heat wave we are bracing now. Now, we will have to endure another tropical night as Seoul is expected to wake up to 27 degrees Celsius on Tuesday, Busan to 26 and Jeju to 25 degrees. And heat wave warnings are currently in effect in most parts of the country, with Seoul reaching up to 37 degrees Celsius and Chuncheon up to 36 degrees. Now, after the storm has passed, temperatures are expected to drop a couple of notches, giving us a break from this unbearable heat. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
That will do it for this edition of Arirang News. Thank you, as always, for watching.
News in Depth is next.